Hello everybody, the Nameless Narcissist here once again. Simple man diagnosed with NPD, talking about pathological narcissism and the stuff that goes on in my head. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. But keep in mind, I'm no clinician, so I can only speak to my own experiences and the research that I read. So, this is something I have personal experience with. A lot of you know, I am ex-military. Good times, not really. And I see a lot of times, narcissism being linked to the military and everything, right? Mainly for political reasons. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard, this was inspired, by the way, by one of my long-term subscribers. I don't know if she wants me to say her name, but if she does, she make comments, I'll pin it. And I'm not coming at her or anything, she just reminded me to make this video. Well, not directly, but you know what I mean. Anyways, so there's a statistic that goes around a lot saying that 20% of people in the military are narcissists. And I never really gave it much thought because I was like, well, they must be measuring subclinical narcissism or something else. Because that makes no sense, right? That's a huge number. I mean, and especially with how big the military is. But so I ended up looking into it a little bit ago, and I found something really interesting about how they took this out of context. So it was in the Air Force with about 300 participants, and there was two groups. There was a group of people who went into treatment in the military on their own accord, and the ones that by their commander were told to go into therapy and stuff, or treatment, whatever. And 20% of the people who were directed to go in by the commander, those are the ones that 20% of them were narcissists. Which, don't get me wrong, that's huge. Because usually it's overwhelmingly borderline schizotypal, but the biggest ones in these people who were made to go to therapy by their commanders were narcissistic and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. But yeah, so it's a very small number of people comparatively to the number that some people would have you believe. But that being said, I do think there's some big reasons why people associate narcissism and the military so much. Because I do think that there is no representation of narcissism there, which this is obviously, that study itself does show that, even if it's not to the degree that most people mean. Jesus, I don't know what's wrong with me today. Because you gotta think about it, right? When I was younger, why the military appealed to me was the hierarchical structure. You know exactly who's on top, who's on bottom. You know how, there's a very set hierarchy, right? Something to constantly be working up. Literally when I was little, I was not little, but I was in high school being oh, I'm gonna be a dictator and I'll climb the ranks of the officer corps and take over the world, I guess. Yeah, I genuinely thought I was gonna be a dictator when I was when I was younger. It was weird. That was probably the greatest extent my grandiosity or grandiose fantasies ever got to. But yeah, I mean, you can see why the appeal, the authoritarian nature of it, the prestige associated with being in the military. I would love to brag about being in the military all the time. I actually got better about it once I got back because I was now I'm self-conscious about it, kind of. But for me, the military was not that great because I ended up failing my PT test, and so that stopped me from getting promoted anymore. And every time I went there, I was miserable. It felt like I just had a fucking symbol of shame because I couldn't be promoted anymore. Everywhere I went, it sucked. It really did. All my friends were going sergeants and corporals and shit. And I became I would be an almost completely different person when I was at drill. Because I would go, I would be so quiet and just sensitive and putting my head down and everything. And it's very interesting in Ella Rominston's paper on NPD. She points out how this is actually kind of common for narcissists. In front of different people in different situations, they can present more grandiose or more vulnerable. There was this example in a case study I read where this woman was super confident at her job. Pretty sure she was a surgeon. She would talk to everybody completely fine. She was very confident. She domineeringly so at time. Her self-esteem was very much hinged on her work performance. But she would go to her boss and she would become a stammering mess and she wouldn't be able to talk properly. And it's because of the intimidation of somebody having power over you and somebody being higher up on that hierarchy. I experienced that all the time when I was in the prison and when I worked at the prison and when I was in the army. There's another case study done with this dude who was a lawyer. Well, he was studying to be a lawyer, and he was basically a genius. He would be oh no, I'm not a genius. It's funny. and he had an IQ of 150, which makes me sad because that means there's a narcissist out there with a higher IQ than me, and that's just not going to fly. But he would give a speech in front of like 10,000, like the entire college for something. I don't remember what it was for, and be completely fine. But then just in front of his peers and classmates and his teacher, he had a nervous breakdown giving some kind of presentation. And that's actually what ended up in an inpatient, because he went on this spiral afterwards of like, he didn't want to go to class to avoid the shame. He started failing other things. He got really in his head. And eventually he went to inpatient. Which also goes to show how differently, like, how do I put it? How like the presentations of narcissism can be so varied in how vulnerable and grandiose traits normally manifest. But yeah, back on topic of the military. And like, I would make the argument too that some people who are more impulsive and potentially like dangerous, I suppose, are interested in the idea of combat, the idea of glory, right? More so for the procedure, but also just sensation seeking. We're chronically bored. It's like, oh my God, like going into war would be so cool. I know quite a few people who like felt like that, which I don't really understand. I don't really want to die. I mean, I can see the appeal of going into combat, right? I mean, why do we have war video games, I guess? But the risks of dying, I'm not a huge fan of. Regardless, I didn't really have too much thoughts on this, if I'm being honest. I more so just wanted to point out that like that statistic that's thrown around so much just isn't really true. But, you know, whatever. Hope everyone has a good day. Take your fucking meds.